how to transform what it is I'm doing to be compliant with that reward structure. So here's an example. I started out life with a PhD in environmental engineering and environmental analysis, and I was doing this environmental modeling. But I'm a faculty member in a college of business. And so I looked at what I was doing and thought, well, I have this article that's pretty well cited in environmental pollution, but I think this would play well if I put a marginal slant to it and revised this work and took it to a business journal, which is now in the European Journal of Operational Research, of course, updated, different data set. But now I'm getting credit for it within my college, because this is another good publication within a college of business. And so I also moved off into slightly other disciplines over time and morphed what I do. Now, there's a reason I did that. And it's, some people chase the idea, I like to solve problems, but I like to work with people doing it. And so when I was a faculty member at Drexel University, I could work with engineers, I could work with scientists, I could work in a particular kind of arena. When I came here, that arena was not available to me. And so I started developing skills in survey research. I had the luxury of time, in part, but I tried to move relatively quickly, despite that. And so I sat in on a course that was taught here in structural equation modeling by Randall Schumacher in about 1993, 91, somewhere, 91 or 2. And I promised him I wouldn't teach the course. Of course, he's left UNT for a number of years, so I guess it's okay if I teach it now. But I did promise him I wouldn't teach the course. And I developed skills in survey research methods. And I've published probably 50 to 70 articles in survey design, development, as well as survey data analysis. So the point I'm making is I like working with other people. I like working in certain areas, but the specifics of what I do are not so prescriptive that I have to work with the same kind of equipment repetitively, and I have the ability to flex around that. And that allows me to do the things I like, but still consistent with the reward structure that's in place. And that's something to bear in mind in terms of chasing what you enjoy. Similar with teaching. You know, I actually used to enjoy teaching undergrads and graduate classes, and the reason I did is they have very different personalities. You teach graduate students, they seem to be kind of demanding and they want a lot, but they're also attentive. You teach undergrads and they're less demanding. On the other hand, they seem kind of happy. So I always enjoyed the kind of difference in their outlook in life. But at some point, I'm teaching 200 students and I'm not sure I get to know any of them. So if I could then gravitate more to grad classes, all the better, a luxury that you can enjoy if the department opportunity presents itself, and it did for me. But you've got to be good at all of this. You've got to be good at large classes. You've got to be good at online. You've got to be good in small classes. It doesn't mean you're not better at one than the other. And I know, some people are particularly weak in some areas and you can only go so far. But at the same time, you do want to develop yourself as best you can in all those areas. And the reason is that the more transferable your skill set is across a variety of different venues, the less burdensome it is to take on a task, the less burdensome it is to complete the task successfully, the more value you bring. Ultimately, you want to bring value in things that you're both rewarded for and that you enjoy. And that's not inconsistent with everything that was said, but it's a slightly different slant. All right, so, the service. I do a fair amount of service. I was PAC chair for a number of years. I was on the college PAC committee. I was running that center. I coordinated an undergraduate core course with 6 sections and 1,200 students in it. At the same time, one of the things that's different about the way I do things is I make it extremely mechanical, in the sense that I decide what needs to be done, I make a list of those things, and then I proceed to do them. And they're no longer taking intellectual engagement They're no longer taking the level of effort such that I'm tired and can't work on my research in the evening or in the morning, or it varies over the decades as to when I worked and why. And that's because I always worked around my family. And so when, in the beginning, we didn't have children, and I could stay up late at night, then eventually I transitioned to working early in the morning, and eventually my mother was living with us for 17 years and getting quite old, and I had to manage her in the morning. Young children, start working at 10 at night, taking them to activities, carrying hard copy, and sitting in outside their art lessons and working in hard copy. I've done all of that. That takes intellectual engagement at a different level in service. It doesn't mean you're doing service in a half-hearted, perfunctory manner. It means that service doesn't require the same level of intellectual concentration as research and publication does. And so you have to figure out how to do one and the other in some type of way that you can manage that. One of the things I do when I early on was teach in only evening classes. So it might be, why would I teach only evening classes? Anybody? So I can tell you. I was training myself to, like an athlete has to learn to run, a mile and then 2 miles, to do research. And it was hard to sit down and do research. I had this whole thing, I was like, I wasn't allowed to shower or exercise till I got something I said I was going to do done. And I would leave a list of things I had to do. And so I would do that first thing in the morning. But I could teach, I could stand in front of a class, and I could go through material that I know quite well, even if I was tired. So teaching in the evening was manageable, and I could still deliver a good lecture, and still deal with the students, and still engage them in their projects, because I've even written papers about instructional activities, and engaging students in projects as a learning environment. But I could still do that, because it doesn't require the same level of intensity as you're learning the process. I have to say, it's easier as you get better at it. And it's easier as you develop your skill set. All right, so going back to this, I'm a person who thinks always about the future. Even now, when I was 61, I obtained the professional statistician. I'm always thinking about what is the thing I would like to do next. So I think, great, enjoy your tenure, but truthfully, it's all about the trek for me. It's all about the journey. I enjoy the journey. And so I think you should be focusing on promotion. It doesn't mean you have to say, I'm going to do this in 4 years, although I don't think it's bad to have a specific period of time written down, because I think it makes it more likely that you will achieve it, even if it, but you have to be flexible enough that you don't beat yourself up when it doesn't happen. That's kind of the key to making this work. So if you can say, I would like to be, I've got tenure, this is how many years I think is reasonable given my life and my work and what I'm willing to do, and write that number of years down, then the question is, what are the things that are going to get you? And if you start planning that and keeping your CV up and thinking about those things, I think they're more likely to happen. Now, I do think you should start thinking about longer-term projects. You should start thinking about impact. I just today at lunch was talking to 2 people, and I'm like, the whole point is every generation should be better. And that's kind of the motto I live by. So what is it that you're contributing? And how is it being used? And who is using it? And everybody easily says, well, if I had invented penicillin, I could see that people would live longer. But the reality is people live longer today in part because they have more income for taking care of themselves and allocated to their health. So in that regard, Walmart can claim, hence business research, can claim that they've actually extended life expectancy because they've saved the average family a certain amount of money that they could then use towards health care. Now, you may not see it that directly, but lives had changed from the 1950s. The amount of money people have, the amount of disposable income, discretionary income, income towards health care. Life expectancy when I was a youngster was that you hit Social Security and you largely died. The average person didn't make it past 1 or 2 years of collection. That's not even on the radar. They say 30 years, and guess what? Start coming out with artificial parts, they'll clone a few things, the next thing you know, we'll be here 40 years. So you better start planning for your retirement as well as you're doing all the rest of this stuff. All right, but you see the point? I believe that what I do contributes, and it contributes to organizational performance, it contributes to the better life of workers, and ultimately corporate output contributes to better lives for everyone. And so for me, I found a good place to be in terms of what I do, how I do it, and I'm trying to get you to get a sense for how to do that for yourselves. And everybody has to do that. And in everything you do, you should be able to do that. And if you can do that, you'll both enjoy it. You'll have the drive to be successful at it. And you'll prioritize those things that will make you successful at it. So, thank you.
Any questions?
It's good that you say that you disagree with differently from us.
I'll go with you.
Yeah, I know.
I hated my sabbatical. So you may wonder, why does this guy hate his sabbatical? I had 2 doctoral students finishing their dissertation. I may as well not have been on sabbatical. It was brutal.
I understand I have 4 finishing right now. It's a little intense. Again, I'm Angela Wilson, Associate Vice Provost for Faculty. I'm also Regents Professor in the Chemistry Department. Oops, that is not good.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Okay.
We all do.
What's up, what's down?
The bottom one is,
The
Down is-
bottom one.
Down is up.
That's kind of counterintuitive there.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've already talked about teaching service and creative activity research. But I think something to really think about is you know, when you think about promotion to associate, we often think of that as being kind of being known a little bit more on the national level. And for promotion to full, you really want to kind of go beyond that, and you want to have a growing reputation and go beyond that, and hopefully have what, you know, for UNT sake, as well as your own, more of an international reputation. And so I'll talk a little bit about what's important to try to achieve that. So of course we've got a lot of people who are going to gauge this. And so just like for when you stood for promotion and tenure, it's really important to have, you know, external people that know you. It's very, very critical. And in chemistry, I think Rick had mentioned 5 people, but in chemistry we try to aim for 10 letters. And so a little overkill, but because we always want to make sure we have at least 5 or 6 or 7, and usually we end up getting about 10. And so, you know, you've got to think about, you know, you really need to make sure that you've got some potential external evaluators that know you well enough that you can have, you know, 10 people all saying great things about you. And you also want to aim for top places. You know, if you really want to do this and make sure that you clear the bar and you're kind of on the upward trajectory, I think it's important to not just aim for equal places, but really aim for top places and top experts. And I think also something that I think is very important, and I think this was very useful to me, was to identify some senior faculty at UNT who have kind of proceeded through the ranks, and always use them for some advice. You know, and sometimes, you know, and I always try to find someone who's kind of gone like the usual pace or faster pace towards promotion. And so, you know, 6 years as associate, Rick had mentioned 5, 6, 7 is kind of typical. I think you said average of 7.8, but that includes people who have been 15 plus, you know. And so this may sometimes mean, depending upon your department, it may mean looking outside your department for a mentor. And I think it's important to make sure you're asking early for advice in terms of, you know, what's the mark? You know, are there certain journals I need to be hitting? Are there some different things I need to be doing for promotion to full than just promotion to associate? And these are very important questions to be asking people in your department chair, people on the PAC, or senior faculty. And, you know, I don't think I have to worry about this bunch, but I know that sometimes there's some faculty, and I've you know, as Associate Vice Provost for faculty, I hear these stories. There's some faculty who kind of aim more for just kind of crossing the bar and not quite soaring above the bar. And just, you know, be careful. You don't want to give the wrong impression to your colleagues. I think it's really important to fine-tune the expectations of your teaching, scholarly activity and service in your department. so as I already mentioned, you want to find out if there's some different publications that you should be hitting. Are the expectations going up? Is there a threshold of publication that's expected, or performance if you're in one of the creative arts? Are there certain conference presentations or invitations that you should be getting? These are all things to really engaging. How are the expectations changing? You know, full professor, why is making rank important? We have many faculty who are quite satisfied to stick with kind of the associate professor rank. Many of them have gotten settled in. We've talked about service. Many of them have really gotten settled into a quite incredible amount of service. And so, you know, they're kind of content to do that. But my question is, why not? Why not get a little bit of a raise? But then also, I mean, really, you know, we are hired with the expectation that you're going to make it through the ranks and you're going to go all the way through full professor rank. It's expected, okay? And so I really encourage you to make sure that you are going to that next level. And I think often that there are some opportunities in some fields that are only available if you're a full professor. Many editorial positions, other types of external opportunities. Some universities, UNTs keeps pushing more and more that they don't necessarily want so many associate professors in some leadership positions. They really want people to soar, and I've heard the president say this, soar to full professor, and then, you know, once they're full professor, then some of these doors may open to them. And I think sometimes it's more difficult to achieve some opportunities if you're even on an extended track for associate professor. And I think also it can be very challenging to recover in terms of scholarly activity if you get really, really absorbed by service. And I think there's a lot of potential pitfalls. And I think, you know, often a way to think about this is post-tenure decline. Some faculty may get the mistaken impression that they can slow down. And I think some kind of slowing down, like what Rick talked about, is good. You know, thinking about your family a little bit more, thinking about, you know, kind of yourself a little bit more than you did perhaps as you were trying to kind of go for the drive for tenure and promotion. But I think I've seen many faculty who kind of don't really get back into the scholarly activity as much as they should. They take a break, they take more of a break. Service kind of becomes their life, and they take more and more and more of a break. And sometimes in some fields it's very difficult to kind of get back into it. And so I really caution you on this. If you need a break, take a week, take part of next summer, but don't take the whole summer. Okay? The expectations for full professors that you have exceeded what you've done as an assistant professor. And so, you know, what are you going to do that's kind of beyond that? What are you going to do that's different? Victor talked about that as well. And I think sometimes the problem is that there's generally no time frame to move to full. It's positive that there's not a time frame, but yet it can be really challenging because, you know, we know that there's a certain time frame we need to accomplish so many things as an assistant professor. That's kind of gone as associate professor. And so I think, you know, you have to be very careful that you don't take too long of a break. Very, very critical. We talked already about university service. And it is great. It is important to be a good citizen. But there are some faculty that enjoy the service so much that they really get intertwined in service, that they slide or even ignore the expectations of scholarly activity. You know, I think it's so much easier to be involved in service, and I think often it seems so much more rewarding. You get the outer girls or the outer boys from some of the service that you do, not always, but often. And you certainly get that from teaching. You feel very fulfilled when the student has said, "Oh, you've turned the light on, I understand," and it's very exciting. It's a lot more difficult sometimes if you're publishing and you get rejections. You work 2 months on a proposal and it's rejected. And so a lot of people get very frustrated. Victor had told some great stories about, you know, people get papers rejected. And you know, often they don't necessarily they get very frustrated and give up and say, "Hey, I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired of getting my papers rejected." But you know, what's great to go, conferences are great places to go to because you can hear some of the most senior people in your field talk about how their papers are rejected. And you know, even though you feel bad for them, it also makes you feel a lot better that you're not the only one. And so it's really important to make sure that you're keeping up with that scholarly activity. I think there's a lot of really bad advice out there. And this is a quote that I found on the web. It says, "It's really quite simple. You don't rush good cheese and you don't rush good wine. Don't rush full professor." There's some truth in that, but I think that one of the problems is, and I've seen the results from the climate survey the university did a number of years ago. And there's a lot of faculty who are associate professors. They're very humble. And they don't feel that they really are ever ready, or that they've really kind of gotten to the point where they have earned standing for full. And I think it's really important to realize that you work hard, you make a name for yourself, and go for the promotion. Go for the promotion. If you've been more productive than you were as an assistant professor, you've hit certain papers, you've talked to your department chair, go for it. Go for it. You're never, I think many faculty never feel that they're quite ready to go for it. And I think it's really important to make sure that you don't wait too long, that you go ahead and go through the process. I think that it's important that as soon as you become an associate professor, as soon as you begin thinking about this a little bit more, start acting like a full professor. I think Victor mentioned bigger projects, higher impact projects. Do something different. Sometimes this means riskier projects, and not just continuation of what you did as an assistant professor, and Rick mentioned this as well. There is higher service expectations, but select them. Select them in a very selective fashion. What's going to be beneficial to you? What is important to you? The initial period after promotion to associate can really impact your career trajectory, and that's really important to make sure you're on that good, solid career trajectory. The guidelines for a promotion to full professor are often not as clear. Rick's already mentioned that. So set your own trajectory. Proceed as quickly as you can, or the opportunity might pass you by. Set some bars for yourself. Sit down and talk to a couple senior faculty, and really aim high. Track everything. We've already mentioned that as well, even the small things, and you can decide what's important to include later on. I think it's really important to identify opportunities. And things like if you're in an area where there's funding opportunities, awards, etc. Really important, I think, to visit the websites of other colleagues that are just slightly more senior than you, not only at UNT, but also externally. And that gives you, for me, that gave me a lot of insight in terms of what else is out there, what else might I be able to try, what opportunities are there that I may not have necessarily heard about or taken time to hear about as an assistant professor. I think it's important to make use of external mentors to aid in reviewing your scholarly work, your scholarly activity. Find faculty that you've met and trust from networking, from collaborations, etc. And also, Victor already mentioned the faculty mentoring and network groups. He's got a group. I've been a part of a group, a writing group, which has been very, very helpful. There's about 50 faculty involved, and it's really a time to kind of go off to an oasis on campus where no one else knows where you're at, and you can really focus on getting your writing done. I think as faculty, it's very difficult sometimes to find the time, the focused place, a place where you can really focus and you can get a lot of writing done. And so some of these groups can be very helpful for that. And for me, I must admit that there was a lot of things that I didn't know even going in as a full professor. And, it was interesting because as I was standing for promotion, one of my colleagues said, I see that you have gotten invitations to a lot of conferences, but why aren't you getting invitations to universities? I said, well, I've gotten some, but he said, well, you're not getting a lot. He said, aren't you inviting yourself? And I said, excuse me, but what? And I've certainly, now that I've been seminar chair in my department, I've gotten people who've called me and said, hey, I'm going after promotion soon. Do you think I could come give a seminar there? And so it feels a little awkward doing it, but a lot of faculty do this, and so don't hesitate. I happened to be going to Cornell one time for another meeting, so I contacted someone and said, I'm going to be there. He said, oh, come give a seminar. So it was a great time to give a seminar in front of a Nobel laureate, so really good experience. So, so don't hesitate doing something like that. And like I said, colleagues have done this. It's very, very easy to do. And awards. I had always assumed that these just happened and selectees were surprised by the honor. However, what I found when I became full professor was that I had a lot of people in my department and other places contacting me and saying, would you nominate me for this award? And I'm like, oh, that's the way it works. Don't hesitate to do that. It's nice to get accolades if you're doing a good job. Don't hesitate to say, hey, how about this opportunity? Would you consider nominating me? Ask your department chair, get to know other people. If they nominate, if you get asked to nominate someone, turn around and say, well, would you nominate me for this? Don't hesitate to do that, okay? But I think it's really important to have a good realistic look in terms of how nominations are done, see who's gotten awards in the past, and realistically gauge if the timing is important, and realistically gauge if you really are appropriately qualified for whatever award. But definitely important to be able to approach the topic with your internal mentor or your department chair, or someone externally if it's an external award. We've already talked also about external opportunities. Definitely pursue these. I think having leadership positions in professional societies, advisory boards, external committees, etc., can really provide you with some tremendous connections. Some of my best connections have come through professional societies, and so I've gotten all types of wonderful research connections, and other opportunities have arisen from these colleagues that I've met at professional meetings. And these are relationships that I've built through the years, and every year it seems to be, they seem to pay off more and more, and I can't recommend them enough. I think it's really important to make sure that you avoid working in isolation. It is so incredibly important to expand your network as you're thinking towards full professor. A number of years ago, I was working with a faculty member who was going through promotion to full professor. And this faculty member, the way my department works this is they say, okay, well, why don't you give us a list of names of people that you wouldn't mind having review your file, and we pick half the names from them, and then we also pick half the names for the external letters on our own. Well, as I was going through this faculty member, this faculty member gave me 20 different names, and I was going through the list, and I'm like, how many of these people do you know? This individual knew only one. I think that's not the best way to go through promotion to full. I think it was you, Rick, who said you should know these people, and at least 5 people know well enough that they can give you good letters. And I think that's really critical. You don't want to be in a position where you only know one of these 20 people that are like the leading people in your field. You need to make sure you take the time to get to know them. Going through conferences is the best way to get to know them. I also mentioned on the last slide that another way to get your name out there is also send your students to conferences. If you've got some really talented students, they can also help make networks for you as well. So that's a useful way to get your name out, your students' name out, and also make some of these bridges. Learning to say no, we've already talked about that, is really important. Don't say yes to everything, and certainly pick and choose what you would like to do. And I think also another thing that comes into play is being a good senior colleague. Something that comes up is, somebody probably mentored you when you were an assistant professor. If they didn't, let me know. I need to talk to your department chair. But I think it's really important to make sure that you're kind of turning the manager in favor and making sure that you are there and you're mentoring some of the junior colleagues in your department. And also take time to recognize them. You may find more rewards and more opportunities come your way if you're doing the same for your colleagues. I think that's very important. So take time to be available for mentoring. Take time to support one another, because honestly, the more awards and opportunities that happen internally in your department, more happen at the university level, more happen on the external level. So it's kind of a build-up process. It also helps you become more known, and your department to become more well-known, and the university to become more well-known when you do these types of things. And so that's kind of the end for me. So if you have questions for any of us, well, thank you for coming, first of all. And if you have questions for any of us, we're happy to answer any of the questions you may have.
A question about the citations. You kind of grazed over it.
Okay.
When you're going up for, I know some of them from college read, but when I was going up, they said do not be concerned about who cites you and so on and so forth, just do the citation count and so on. So does that change when you go forward, where you kind of note who is citing you and work and so on? I think that goes to international recognition or something like that.
Right. I think it depends so much from department to department. And I know some departments look at things like the H index, and some departments and have said, we're not going to worry about the H index because there's so many different ways you can do the evaluation. And some want to know who's using your work. And so it really depends upon your department. Some departments may be more thrilled that the leading expert in your field is citing your work. Some may be more excited that there's 5,000 people citing your work. So So it's very departmental dependent. So.
That's good to know. It's just like,
But exactly. Well, and actually, again, if you can have 5 or 10 or, people, that are international experts all saying his work is spectacular, then, yeah, that's important, so.
One of the questions you asked earlier, how to vet what opportunities to go with. I completely forgot about it. This is advice I give to people going out for tenure. I know the provost office isn't like this, but I actually recommend that you take a single sheet and stick it in the front of your Vita. That's everything that you think is important to your case. Your money, your publications, the counts. So basically remember, it's people who are going to review your document. They'd like a summary. Even though it's not official, I know that.
The short list, right?
It's basically, make sure whatever it is that you put on there fits in reasonable font for old people like me, that it fits in the one page. If it doesn't, if you're not going to use it in the one page, say no.
Yikes.
No, but I think, because you're only going to have so much of that bar, Angela, at the bottom per service.
Right.
How much, you can't make that this long and have it fit on that one page.
But but to contrast that in some way, yes, I definitely see your point. However, sometimes you're involved in so many things, and so some important things do fall off. I think if I'd listed one page, I probably wouldn't list the fact that I've been director of a National Science Foundation REU program for a dozen years. But yet, the payoff for that has been the students that have been in the program. A lot of them come join a graduate program, they've joined my research group. So they've really helped excel, help propagate my research. It's been a heck of a lot of work because we were up to like 400 applicants a year. But it's very worthwhile service. And, so I think some things that wouldn't necessarily be on there, on my list of one page, I think are still very important and worthwhile. I think some of the things that I've done on the national level, international levels, probably wouldn't make that first page, but in the long haul, the people that I have met, in terms of networking and all that, have been so critical in terms of kind of helping my career trajectory through the years. So, I think you have to really weigh it. You probably don't want to be on 30 university committees, but, so. And for me, I was asked to be on a committee that I mentioned earlier that I thought, I really have no interest in this at all. And certainly I've been on some committees like that. You have to do that from time to time. But when I just said, okay, not really interested in this, but if there's an opportunity for this other one to come up soon, I'm happy to do that. And the folks in faculty senate were fine with that. And so I figured I'll pick my committees and pick my opportunities. And I never filled up so much internally that I couldn't do anything externally.